And what we'll be looking at today is some of the non-canonical Gospels. So those Gospels which are not part of the New Testament. And as you'll quickly come to see, there's a lot more that was left out of the New Testament than what was put in. And so we'll be examining that today. And unfortunately, we won't have the time to go into great detail about all the non-canonical Gospels. That would take maybe a course or two to really go into depth about all of the non-canonical literature that's out there. So what we'll do is we'll survey just a very selected few. Namely, we'll be looking at the Gospel of Thomas, perhaps one of the most important and famous of the non-canonical works. We'll be examining also the infancy Gospel of Thomas. And finally, we'll be talking about the secret Gospel of Mark. But again, there's a lot of other texts out there, and I'm sure you've heard of them, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, all of these different Gospels that are very popular, that are very intriguing and interesting. Unfortunately, we won't have the time to go into it in too much detail today, although at the end, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Again, we're going to go with the same format as last week, and I hope you all got used to the way I lecture. It's basically me lecturing and you asking questions at the same time. Feel free to interrupt, feel free to ask questions. Anything that doesn't make sense usually doesn't make sense to someone else. Can everyone see the screen okay? Excellent. So as I mentioned, some of the texts we will be examining is the Gospel of Thomas, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, and the secret Gospel of Mark. And there's many, many other biblical texts that are not in the canon that we won't be able to examine today, but certainly they are of interest. I suggest that you explore them. And there's always courses in theological studies or in the religion department that are usually devoted to these texts. I know Dr. Henri Gagné teaches a course specifically on Gnosticism, and he goes really in depth with some of the Nag Hammadi literature, which we'll be talking about in just one moment. So the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library. So the discovery was made in 1945, and this is a really important year for biblical scholarship, because in 1945, in the upper town of Egypt, Nag Hammadi, hence the name, there's a discovery made by someone by the name of Muhammad Ali Samad. And what he discovers there are original manuscripts written in Coptic of a whole bunch of non-canonical texts. So what he discovers is not just the Gospel of Thomas, but there's a whole, there's so many various Coptic texts that are discovered there, which are not found in the Gospels. And this is really important. And today these are in the Cairo Museum in Egypt. And as we've spoken about last week when we talked about the canonical Gospels were likely written in Koine Greek. And these documents that were found at Nag Hammadi were written in Coptic, and in a specific dialect, usually Sahidic, although the dialects kind of vary from region to region, and sometimes they're intermixed. And so this is really important because they're not written in Greek, they're written in Coptic, which is the language of Egypt, and it's likely a translation from original Greek documents. So originally these would have been likely written in Greek, some of these texts, and they were later translated into Coptic. Was there a question there?
No, you answered it.
All right. Excellent. So you have a map there just to give you an idea of where Nag Hammadi is in terms of its proximity to Cairo and where it stands in Egypt and near the Nile. And of course, we were lucky enough to know where these were discovered. Oftentimes, some of these texts, these biblical manuscripts are discovered in some of these areas, and then they're sold to different places, and they're very valuable. And so by the time biblical scholars get their hands on them, the place of origin, where they were found, is sometimes not entirely certain for some of the texts. So this is important that it is in Nag Hammadi. What you have there is an image of Caravaggio. Does anyone know what that image represents? Any ideas?
Is that Judas?
No. You can see someone sticking their finger into flesh. Yes, exactly. So what you're going to have here is this is a complete list of the codicates found at Nag Hammadi. Does anyone know? Do you remember what the codex is or codicates?
It's a book.
codices is the plural for that. And so we have these different books, or different codices that were found. And within each one are several different documents. And as you can see here, we have the whole list. And so in the first codice, we have the prayer of the Apostle Paul, the Apocryphon of James, the Gospel of Truth, and the list goes on. The Gospel of Thomas, the one we'll be examining, is found in the second codex, right after the Apocryphon of John and before the Gospel of Philip. And just to give you an idea of how much literature that was found at Nag Hammadi, we'll go through these slides and they'll give you an idea of all of the different works that were found. So there's quite a few. There's, if I'm not mistaken, several codices that were found. And there's so much literature there that even up until today, I mean, this was discovered in 1945, and even today scholars are still at the very early stages of making sense of all of these texts. And certainly some of them have been studied upon more than others. The Gospel of Thomas has received considerable scholarly attention when compared to some of these other texts. And there's some reasons for that. One, and it's likely the fact that Thomas is very similar, perhaps not exactly similar to what we have in the canonical Gospels, but it's nonetheless a Gospel. It nonetheless talks about Jesus. It gives us these sayings of Jesus. And so scholars are perhaps more aware and at ease with this material because it seems to make more sense. Whereas some of this material is sometimes completely very different than what we find in the New Testament or what we find in the Hebrew Bible in some cases. So, of course, you've heard about Nag Hammadi, and for some of you, you've actually read about it in the course pack, and you've perhaps seen some pictures. But of course, what does this really mean for biblical scholarship? And what would it look like and feel like to see some of the people who actually discovered these texts? And last week, we looked at a very short clip from a recent documentary type video that's on YouTube, and you got to see some of these non-canonical texts and some of the reenactments that this video portrays. But what I want to do for you is actually look at a video, and it's not the best quality video, but it will give you a sense of the find and the importance of this find. And some of the scholars who are in this video are very prominent scholars. So I'm just going to show you this video, and just to give you an idea of